Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night to you lovely folks joining me here at Marvel Snap Zone. Welcome back for another episode of our weekly tier list segment, the show that takes you kind of through the best performing and most popular decks in Marvel Snap right now, and looks to break down their strengths inside of the current metagame. The tier list is obviously the most time-intensive and difficult to create piece of content that we produce every single week, and rightfully so. Some people have been asking questions recently about exactly how it works and how we kind of refine it to get to the point that it's in. So wanted to offer some additional clarity this week as to exactly how this tier list works. If you're not sure about anything and want to double check anything I've said, feel free to go and check out the article version of this tier list in the description box for more information about any of the details. In order to be featured in the Marvel Snap Zone tier list, a deck needs to represent at least 1% of the current metagame and have a positive cube average using data from the Marvel Snap Tracker. This is now our primary source of information when it comes to correlating and creating this tier list, as we now have a very large amount of players using it each and every day to track their decks, their performance, their cube averages, their win rates, and so much more. So if you want to get involved in providing data for this tier list, the best thing you can do is download the tracker from our link in the description box down below. If a deck has showed great performances but has a very limited presence in the metagame, you can now find it in a new section of this tier list called Silent Performers. There we're going to highlight decks that have an excellent cube per game ratio but have too small of a sample size to really represent their strength overall. These builds can either be decks that are declining popularity-wise, such as things like Negative Surfer, largely eclipsed by Sera Surfer this season, and it can also be unpopular decks because the cards that they include or the gameplay that they create, such as things like Thanos Zoo. Lastly, it can be a rising deck that we want to know more about before trying to rank it among the other popular decks. In this case, Lockjaw On Reveal this week will fall into that criteria. For decks that have a good representation but aren't performing well enough to be considered contenders, they will be ranked inside of tier 4 on this tier list, but they will not have their own dedicated write-ups on the tier list this time. See tier 4 as decks that are good to know about, as you should be facing them sometimes when you're playing Marvel Snap. However, unless the metagame changes or a new variation of that build emerges, those decks won't be particularly noteworthy picks at the moment. With all that said, we have got some data to look at this week to try and break down exactly what the best decks in Marvel Snap look like right now. If you are a tier list fan and you enjoy this content, do me a favor, make sure you're subscribed to Marvel Snap Zone. Go and press the like button for me and just leave a comment. Help keep the YouTube gods happy and make sure that we know we're doing a good job by creating this type of content. We know this week's kind of breakdown might not be for long because the previous balance patch was hinted to be somewhat of a trial run for a bigger one in the future, and the upcoming series drop is at the end of the month as well, which could give the second dinner team more liberty to change some cards that are going down a tier in rarity, such as Shuri. So the end of the Savage Land season could be filled with plenty of surprises, but for now, as we close into the third week of Zabu's Jungle, we can only recognize the mighty trio that are the dominant top of Marvel Snap right now. Let's take a look at the tier list in full. Again, if you want to get more information or exportable deck lists for any of these lists, pop on over to the website and go take a look at Den's well-written article. There you will find replacements for cards you might be missing, ways to play the deck and play patterns you should be looking for, and so much more that goes into this tier list every single week. So please do take the time to check it out. If you're looking for budget options this week, there are still a few available with deck lists guaranteed. So if your collection isn't maybe as flush as some other people's, these are decks that we think truly can compete if you are playing the game on a budget. So well worth checking those ones out. Tier 4 this week consists of just 3 decks. Cerebro 2 kind of trending downwards at the moment in time to join Discard Lockjaw and Ongoing Destroyer as decks that still see plenty of play in Marvel Snap but aren't really having a noteworthy performance right now. Tier 3 is quite an interesting one. Things continue to bubble up and down in this kind of tier. Zerocula, the Kazoo variant of most renown, most popularity prior to this point, finds itself at the bottom of Tier 3 this week as a playable option. It's joined by She-Hulk Baero, once a just juggernaut of the game, not having the same level of success it previously was. Zabu Control, a deck that is a pet project of many here at Marvel Snap Zone, not quite putting up a finish to climb higher this time around. Last but not least, Galactus finds itself as the champion of Tier 3, not quite breaking into the upper echelons of the game this week, but is still putting on a good show all around. Tier number 2, the two different good card priority lists remain options you can play if you're looking to climb on a Series 3 card pool. Both have pros and cons. In fact, we made a video just a little while ago comparing the two decks to each other that you're welcome to go and check out. But both of these still super great choices for climbing the Marvel Snap ladder in the dying moments of the season. Lockjaw On Reveal making a calamitous return to the tier list this week, coming out of nowhere and surprising a lot of people with some raw power of a long-forgotten archetype. Can't wait to take a closer look at that one to walk you through it. Last but not least, Patriot Surfer, the kind of de facto version of Surfer and Patriot right now, if you're looking to combine those two shells together. Still putting on a great show and a fantastic deck that is well worth playing if you want to be climbing up that Marvel Snap ladder. Last but not least, there are 4 options tucked into Tier 1 this week, and it is a similar story as weeks gone by. Zabu Darkhawk now takes the title of the best deck in Marvel Snap, data showing the deck is continuing to be refined and continuing to overperform. Shuri Zero remains an absolute juggernaut of the game, but does not take the top slot this time around. ZabuCula, the kind of Zabu-based Dracula shells based around Pool 3 powerhouses like Red Skull, really putting on a great showing for decks that don't have access to Series 4 and Series 5 this week, and really up there with the best of them right now. Looking forward to breaking that one down for you in a bit more detail. Last but not least, Sera Surfer taking a bit of a tumble, remaining a Tier 1 deck for sure, but becoming more predictable than ever. People are familiar with the play patterns, they know the cards you can play, and they are arguably way more likely to retreat than ever before. For our first ever installment of Silent Performers of the Week, as mentioned previously, Negative Surfer, Thanos Zoo, and Electro Wong Reveal are the decks that make the cut. Negative Surfer and Thanos Zoo kind of explained briefly before why they're down here in the Silent Performers this week, but this Electro Wong Reveal deck, definitely a new addition to people's attention, and looking forward to seeing how that one evolves over the coming days. So let's start breaking things down in a bit more detail. Zabu Darkhawk, the best Zabu deck, has only progressed ever since this card was released and now has reached the top of the mountain. What clearly makes this deck so special is Zabu opening some incredibly powerful turn 6 plays that aren't easily countered by an opposing leader, as your Darkhawk and their Darkhawk will usually be different sizes. As a result, a good Zabu player with the perfect hand should be able to play around all of the current traps in the metagame. For example, leaving priority before turn 6 so Enchantress and Shang-Chi cannot remove your big cards, so they haven't been revealed yet. Although the more traditional list of Zabu Darkhawk that will show shortly for you on screen has more full-cost cards like Spider-Man, Absorbing Man, or even Shang-Chi as well, and those decks are definitely more popular currently. This points version that you see on screen, taking a page from the Devil Dinosaur archetype, seems to be able to develop points even when not drawing into Darkhawk. It's unclear which of these two versions is the clear standout, clear-cut best right now, but both takes on the deck are climbing to stupidly high ranks. Up next, we take a look at Shuri Zero being edged out by Darkhawk this week as one of the few cards in the game that is able to rival the power of the card Shuri helps create. Shang-Chi being easier to include as a counter in the other deck was the deciding factor on who got the number 1 slot this week, but do not be fooled, Shuri Zero is still an extremely strong deck, and the addition of Sauron, for those who have collected the card, is only making this one feel stronger as time passes. The big upside of Shuri Zero is how simple it is to navigate the second portion of the game compared to other, more combo-orientated decks. Here the deck can often fit the meme of Big Boy Go Brr, as you literally just play a 30 power Red Skull on turn 5 and then copy it on turn 6 to seal a very hard to lose game. As a result of this very simple take on how to create points, Shuri Zero definitely feels like a concept deck where you immediately feel extremely powerful once you've built a list that represents that concept. For some, it can be a little bit annoying to have so little room to work with in order to adapt to the metagame. For others, they're slamming their big cards and racking up those cubes. ZabuCula appears next. The other less Series 5 intensive build around Zabu has made largely enough strides this week to earn its own entry in our rankings. It seems to be the best deck without any Series 4 or 5 cards currently, as long as you have Zabu, of course. Similarly to its Darkhawk counterpart, the ZabuCula variant tries to hide how many points it can really develop before it's too late for the opponent to answer those points. Also, because Dracula doesn't require as much support as something like Darkhawk, the deck can afford to play cards like Shang-Chi and Enchantress in order to gain some reactive power. These two inclusions seem to give the deck most of its game against the other big competitors in the format right now, giving the deck another route to try and win a point shootout it seemed a little bit unfavoured in before. You could see this deck as a hybrid of Zabu Darkhawk and the Shuri Zero deck, cutting most of the expensive cards, but keeping those two core concepts together. Last but not least, in Tier 1 this week, Sera Surfer, as good as you can be, there comes a point when you've reached your peak, and newer cards will come and push other archetypes to be able to adapt past your ability or edge out their matchup against you. That's kind of what's happening to this deck right now, as it's arguably the most polished deck in Tier 1, but also the one where it's most difficult to come up with a clear improvement or meaningful change. I don't expect Sera Surfer to become a bad deck anytime soon, and it should stay both a top deck for popularity and performance at least through the rest of this season. But according to the tracker, Sera Surfer represents more than 35% of the metagame at rank 80 and above, so clearly the deck has some time before we can really consider it to be declining. Simply put though, everyone knows what it can do and has adapted to it accordingly, so it's only logical this deck isn't the absolute best in the game anymore. Moving down to tier number 2, slowly but surely Patriot Surfer is climbing and threatening to be a menace for tier 1 archetypes all around. The list hasn't changed compared to last week, but we would attribute some rise of this deck to more players giving the archetype a shot, and probably playing the deck better with more time under their belt than before. There are some alternative play patterns with this deck, some players looking to explore cards like Doctor Doom instead of Ultron, but for the most part the list is fairly set in stone. We're a bit scared of Enchantress making a comeback for this one, because Zabu isn't going anywhere and Devil Dinosaur is on the rise. However, Silver Surfer and Patriot dodge Shang-Chi perfectly, and Ultron is great to completely ignore Spider-Man as well in matchups where that's proving to be an issue. So for now, the stars seem to have aligned for the Patriot Surfer duo to maybe give a run for its money to Sera Surfer as the best deck of the archetype. Actually, Sera's in this one as well, so never mind that last part. The comeback of the week definitely goes to everyone's favourite good boy in Marvel Snap, Lockjaw On Reveal. In a world where Zabu and Silver Surfer are battling to know who is the best 3-cost card, and Shuri joins them to figure out who's worth more points, Lockjaw has emerged as a surprising yet not illogical contender. Indeed, when it comes to cheating both energy and points, Lockjaw has been a staple ever since the days of beta, way back before any of these cards were even available. There are two huge upsides to playing Lockjaw currently, one based on the decks that's ranked above it, and one regarding the next entries coming in the near future. Lockjaw does not care about any of the popular tech cards currently, apart from maybe Shang-Chi if you manage to cheat the Infinite in very early. Even Cosmo doesn't really do much for Lockjaw's lane apart from disabling Jubilee, but she can be played somewhere else if the opponent commits Cosmo early. This is a really big upside to know your key card can't be disabled by the opponent when Zabu, Shuri and Silver Surfer have Cosmo, Enchantress and Shang-Chi ready to counter them at the very first occasion. More importantly perhaps, Leech and Leader are also not a problem for Lockjaw, as neither really impact the cards that we're going to be throwing back into the deck. When the priority archetype is among the most popular builds in the game, it's a nice commodity to be able to ignore most of its most annoying cards. Lastly, one can note that Nightcrawler and Vision have started to get some really good value with the latest very disruptive locations being added to the game, making them fantastic inclusions in this archetype all around. Speaking of Leech and Leader, we move into the 2 priority shells coming for you next. We'll start with priority Dino, the hand-size variation of the deck. With Silver Surfer slowly losing some ground to Shuri and Zabu, there is a need to develop more points right now, rather than being heavily disruptive on the opponent's plan. As a result, the Devil Dinosaur build of priority seems to perform better than its Leech counterpart this week. If Lockjaw On Reveal was the pull 3 archetype to take if you were looking to high roll your way to grinding the ladder, the priority archetype is the pick for you if you want to keep things under control. It can struggle if the game comes down to a point shootout against some of the biggest decks in Snap right now, but it's able to hold its own against most opponents without the perfect hand. With Zabu and Shuri being as, if not more popular than Silver Surfer recently, the uptick in Red Skull and Typhoid Mary has definitely made the Leech Leader priority version of this deck a slightly weaker choice among the two. Sometimes there's even the Infernaut out there right now as well, and this change in the metagame is definitely not a good sign for Leech Leader, who sees Leech being much weaker than it was before. The card seems to be necessary to this archetype in order to compete with Silver Surfer, yet keeping up with Zabu or matching the power of Taskmaster is something that Leader does not find itself able to do. It was way too early to call the strongest pull 3 archetypes of the past month on the decline, but this week is one to forget for this archetype all around. We look forward to seeing if it can make a recovery overall, as it does still see itself as one of the best decks that Series 3 has to offer. Moving ourselves down into Tier 3, Galactus finds itself at the top of this tier still this week. A controversial choice in the eyes of many in the community, but one the data does seem to back up overall. Spider-Man seems to be slowly disappearing from the most popular Zabu decks, which should be great news for Galactus and Null. It's kind of as good as any other card in the game right now in terms of winning a power-based shootout. For those reasons, we do truly believe that Galactus is on the way up and could be heading towards Tier 2 in the near future in the coming weeks. The deck just isn't showing the same results as those in Tier 2 right now though, hence why it finds itself where it is. It's important to note Galactus is showing much more promise than the other decks in Tier 3 this week, so maybe we should consider it closer to something like Tier 2.5 overall. She-Hulk Baero, on the other hand, is still fighting off the armor problem. Doesn't seem to be able to develop its game plan in peace at the moment. The deck is great below the infinite rank, but it seems the player base is still fighting in the 80 to 100 range. They aren't following the meta as closely as those who have already completed the climb. According to the Marvel Snap Zone tracker, the deck is gaining about a 3 to 4% win rate when played outside of the most competitive ranks in Marvel Snap right now. A very interesting statistic that deserves some more study. As such, if you find yourself in the ranks between 80 and 100, maybe Baero is a deck worth trying if you aren't seeing so many opponents with the now very expected Sunspot and Armor duo to open up the game. Zabu Control is up next, still trying to find its footing in the current environment. The Control archetype is trying new cards week after week and showing pretty similar results in the process. This time it's Professor X who seems to make a lot of sense to help this deck limit the opponent's preferential moves and is seeing play in lists that aren't the one featured on screen for you now. Daredevil, however, is a pretty natural fit in this deck, especially if you are playing Professor X, as that's a kind of notable 1-2 punch all around. We look forward to kind of seeing how this archetype continues to evolve in the coming weeks. We should kind of get to a point where it becomes clear what decks are worth countering and those who we should simply just be retreating against. For now, though, it seems like the big problem for Zabu Control is just Silver Surfer, which isn't particularly weak to any of the 4-cost cards you want to play. Maybe Professor X is the key to helping with that, otherwise there will need to be a way to shut down Surfer, or a need to wait until it doesn't represent over a third of the metagame for this control strategy to shine. Zerocula makes its way kind of stable at this point in time. This particular take on Kazoo really hasn't moved in a few weeks and should be considered of having peaked, I guess, in its current form right now. The deck is actually performing very nicely below the infinite rank, particularly in the rank 50 to 79 range, where Series 4 and 5 cards seem to be making less of an impact overall. In that range, Kazoo represents more than 13% of the popular decks, far behind Silver Surfer, but still among the most likely encounters. This might very well be a deck to keep your eyes on, as Shana has just joined the game and could be a kind of card to push new variations of this archetype. We'll look to keep you posted as some of those lists appear in the near future. Every week as we release what is the biggest and most complex piece of content for Marvel Snap Zone, there are comments about how it is a reflection of a pay-to-win agenda that Second Dinner is pushing in Marvel Snap, and for once, the people might be right, as the current metagame clearly took a turn to become a three-way battle between a Series 5 card and 2 Battle Pass cards this week. Still, we want to make sure that we're drawing your attention specifically to several decks in Tier 2 that are made of entirely Pool 3 or lower cards. Also, the meteoric comeback of Lockjaw On Reveal this week shows there are edges to be found, even when they can sometimes be difficult to spot. Lastly, this stale part of the metagame is arguably the worst part of most card games, as we're playing for the excitement of trying new things and discovering new synergies before other people, and foremost, without this annoying part, we would never have the chance at finding the appropriate counters to those strategies or racking up some cubes on their behalf once we've done with our climb as well. So let's hope next week features some more of that, and we can share some rising decks who managed to shut down the dominant cards in a way that we didn't expect, and reinvigorate this metagame going into the end of the Savage Land season. Thank you as always for tuning in to the weekly tier list. If you're looking to let us know what you think, you can leave a comment in the comment section down below, or come and find us in the community Discord and talk Marvel Snap with thousands of other players 24/7. Last but not least, you can reach the team personally over on Twitter. You can find all of us at Marvel Snap Zone. You can find Den at DenCCG, and you can find myself over at HowlingMines. But until next time, I have been HowlingMines. You've been amazing, and this has been the tier list of the week. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.